Good evening, and welcome to Maryland Democratic Party's headquarters, and welcome to the fourth event in our Maryland Climate Matters series. I'm Yvette Lewis, and I'm chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. Tonight's event is entitled Climate Change and Local Government, Community Solutions for a Global Crisis. And we'll discuss how the climate crisis affects local jurisdictions and what residents and leaders can do to counter this threat. First, I want to thank our panelists for joining us. We are fortunate to have Howard County Executive Calvin Ball, Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich, Baltimore County Executive Johnny Olszewski, and Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman as panelists tonight. And thank you to Senator Sarah Elfreth for moderating tonight's panel. And I would like to recognize and thank Ed Hatcher and Angie Cannon for their incredible support and vision for our Maryland Climate Matters series. We are only able to do what we do as a party because of supporters like you. And I am so very grateful for your dedication to this very crucial issue. Finally, thank you to everyone joining us this evening, in person and online. We are happy you've tuned in to hear from our knowledgeable elected officials who are on the front lines fighting to stem the tide of climate change on a daily basis. But before we get to the panel, I would like to introduce Charles County Commissioner President Reuben Collins to give opening remarks. Commissioner President Collins is a lifelong resident of Charles County and began his career in public service over 30 years ago. He is currently in his third term on the Charles County Commission, where he is the first African-American elected commissioner president for Charles County. In 2020, the Charles County government received the Maryland Association of Counties and Academy for Excellence in Local Governance County Innovation Award, recognizing the county's climate change preparedness program. The award is presented to an urban and rural county each year for addressing issues in their communities and serving the needs of residents in ways that are outside the box. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner President Reuben Collins.
Hello, everyone. One thing that became abundantly clear with Hurricane Ida, and I say this as plain as I possibly can, if you didn't know, now you know. Climate change is real. And Charles County recognized that very early on. We understood the impacts that climate change had on our communities. In Maryland, every county is dealing with this issue. We're seeing sea level rise that is made more acute by the compounding effect of land subsidence and more frequent and intense storm events and higher temperatures. In Charles County, the combined impacts of sea level rise, along with our rivers, storm events, and aging infrastructure, much of it privately owned, has created an ever-increasing and emergent problem in our community. So we've kind of addressed this with several mitigation measures. We started by contracting with a power provider to supply over 100% of our government's electricity needs from renewable sources. We also created a climate action plan to reduce carbon emissions countywide through best practices, behavior changes, as well as engaging and educating our residents on climate-related issues. We're not one of the larger counties in the state of Maryland. However, we recognize because we lack the resources that many of the larger jurisdictions have in place, it was important for us to develop partnerships on the state as well as federal level. DNR has been a tremendous help in training our county government employees. More than 25 of Charles County staff members have graduated from the Climate Leadership Academy. And we've identified over 85 positions in Charles County government for climate competency and making those positions mandatory. And thus ensuring that for years to come, we will have staff that is actually trained to look at and address climate change on a regular basis. The Department of Defense and Naval Surface Welfare Center in Indian Head is one of our major employment centers, and we've teamed with the University of Maryland Public Policy Division to help Charles County with joint resilience planning around the town of Indian Head. We've been able to secure state grants from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund to tackle climate change in concert with pollution abatement measures. We're also working with SMECO, the Southern Maryland Energy Cooperative, which is building more than 20 electric vehicle charging stations in publicly accessible locations throughout our county. As you know, SB 457 established and gave us that enabling legislation to create resilience authorities. We've actually implemented a resilience authority in Charles County. It's led by a board of directors. It's comprised of statewide experts in climate science, climate entrepreneurship, drainage systems, and finance, and inclusive of community advocates representing environmental groups such as the Sierra Club and the NAACP. We focus in our community on over 100 communities, and this is one of the main points that I really wanted to stress. Going into this term, we recognize on a real basis the problem with climate change was impacting many of our local communities. And as an elected official, I'm sure many of you have addressed the same thing. Citizens coming to you directly about how are you going to address these issues of flooding in many of these neighborhoods. And another challenge that we were faced with, many of these were privately owned neighborhoods. And technically, the county could argue that, this is really not a government issue per se, but we recognized that there was a public interest in actually addressing, these issues that were becoming a major issue within our community. So we've focused on working directly with HOAs in the community. And we have a plan in place looking at 100 communities. We've actually begun a process to really prioritize where these major issues are impacting communities. And as a result of that, we have in place a plan to address this through our Resilience Authority and an entity that was created by the county to address this very important issue. Lastly, and most importantly, we also recognize the importance of looking at this issue of climate change from the prism of equity and the fact that our community is a majority African American population. When we look at the impact of climate change, unfortunately, it disproportionately impacts communities of color. And so what we've attempted to do is to attack this in a way to ensure that all of our citizens, are put in a position where the county's response is one that is equitable and puts in light the importance of addressing this very important issue. Because again, when I stated at the very beginning, if you were not aware of the impact of climate change after Hurricane Ida, I can tell you this has become a major national discussion. And so I am very proud to be here today, and I want to thank the Maryland Democratic Party for giving me opportunity to talk about what Charles County is doing. And I appreciate, the leadership of all of my colleagues here today that are addressing this very important issue, because it's not limited to any particular jurisdiction. This is a statewide, national, and international issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner President Collins. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Our moderator tonight is Senator Sarah Elfreth. She was elected in 2018 and is the youngest woman ever elected to the Maryland Senate. She serves on the Budget and Taxation Committee, is chair of the Arundel County Senate delegation, and is one of 2 senators representing Maryland on the Multi-State Chesapeake Bay Commission. I will now hand it off to Senator Elrich to begin our panel discussion. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Elrich. I have the great privilege of representing District 30 in the Maryland State Senate, and that is the city of Annapolis, where we're sitting right now, as well as southern Anne Arundel County. And I have the responsibility and privilege of moderating today's panel. So I want to first thank our chair, Yvette Lewis, and our wonderful sponsors for the evening for bringing this incredibly important topic even more thoroughly into the light and thinking through both state, federal, local, and tonight's about local solutions to what can feel like an existential crisis of climate change. But I actually, on this, in addition to the Senate, I teach public policy, and I know I'm going to have some students watching this today. And we just went over approaching a policy problem, thinking through the components of that problem, and that's going to lead us to the solutions. And so I love tonight's conversation because it's really about taking a large-scale problem and focusing in like a laser on some of the things that we can do in our own communities and at the local level. So I want to make sure that we're having an informal discussion, gentlemen, tonight. So I do have a number of questions after we do intros, but I would encourage that anybody jump in if you have solutions, if you have ideas. We can use this to brainstorm for future policy solutions. But I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly to the group, and then we're going to jump in both with some questions that we formulated in advance and questions that are coming in live from our audience. So with that, County Executive Ball.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Calvin Ball, Howard County Executive, a Maryland native, and I am so excited to be here not only to share what we're doing in Howard County, to hear from my colleagues, but also to hear from you and continue moving our state forward when it comes to climate change, when it comes to environmental protection, when it comes to protecting our world for current and future generations. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Elrich. I'm the County Executive of Montgomery County. I'm really happy to be here tonight because, you know, in my mind, if COVID hadn't been the predominant story, climate change would have been the predominant story of the last year, 2 years. Basically, there's no good news on the climate front on any day. We see what's in front of us, and we know this is, it seems to be worsening, and we have real challenges. And I was just noticing earlier that we're like 51 years past Earth Day, the first Earth Day. And it seems like now we're at the point of trying to get down to the work we need to do. One wishes that Jimmy Carter had succeeded in getting those solar panels up and keeping them up after Reagan came in. We should have been down this road earlier, but we're here where we are. And I'm looking forward to, listening to my colleagues. I know everybody's working on it, and it's, we will cross-fertilize, our ideas, because I think only by thinking about this together are we going to get out of it, because it's the state of Maryland. It's not my jurisdiction, Stewart's jurisdiction, anybody's one jurisdiction. It's not going to solve this problem. It's all of us.
Yeah, well, I'm Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, and we have 530 miles of coast in our county, and so I think our residents are acutely aware of the threats of climate change. And I just want to say how thankful I am that the Maryland Democratic Party is hosting this, and hosting it with local officials who some people think can't really address climate change, but in fact, we're going to have a great conversation about the things that we're doing. And it's so important for elected folks, politicians, to look far out into the future. And this is what we're doing. You don't get a lot of immediate political payoff for this, but we know that our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids will have a place to live if we get this right.
Everybody, good evening. Johnny Olszewski from Baltimore County. I don't boast as many miles of waterfront as County Executive Pittman, but we have several hundred in Baltimore County, and we didn't need Hurricane Ida to remind us of what Hurricane Isabel reminded us of, and the devastation that climate change can and has affected on all of our communities. County Executive Elrich mentioned that there are some real challenges out there, but the good news is there are also solutions. And in many ways, like my good friend mentioned, we're leading the way in local government, and we're showing that we can come together to find real, meaningful, impactful solutions to the climate challenge. Everything we do in local government touches all sorts of areas, whether it's transportation, land use and planning, preservation, energy usage. So looking forward to hearing all the great work that my friends and colleagues are doing to lead that fight, because COVID-19 has forced us all to mobilize and take drastic action to save lives and keep us moving forward. But the truth is, the threat of climate change is the same challenge, but extended over our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes. So grateful that we have local leaders and a party that believes in doing something about that, and excited to be part of this conversation tonight.
Well, thank you, county executives. We'll start, and I might start in reverse order, County Executive Olszewski, because you mentioned Ida. And I got to tell you, in my district, we were preparing sandbags for a hurricane and flooding, and instead we got a tornado. And that's the second tornado in just under a year. And thank goodness there were no injuries. We have a lot of property damage from which to recover. But I want to just take a moment and level set of how either Ida or Isabel or other storms have impacted our respective localities. And that way we can start to, I think, dig through some of the solutions to this challenge. So, County Executive Olszewski.
Yeah, I'd say, I think probably like you, Senator, and like my fellow executives here, most of us probably spent a good bit of time in our emergency operations centers as those storms were coming through, and unfortunately saw touchdowns in Anne Arundel, which was pretty devastating in terms of damage. We had a couple touchdown in Baltimore County in that same band of storm in the remnants of Ida. And what I can tell you is it's the physical lives that are lost in the wake of these storms. It's the damages done to businesses and residences. It's the impact of having access to power and basic food and nutrition if these things are extended. So this is it's not just a safety and well-being impact, it's an economic impact. It touches all of our lives. And so planning for the impacts of what we're already seeing, but also doing all that we can to help prevent it from happening in the first place is really critical. And as you mentioned, Senator, I think you sort of see it firsthand. I know you were there with County Executive Pittman in terms of what we're seeing in very, very real and tangible ways.
And I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from how to better react quickly. And I think a lot of lessons we learned from COVID in terms of immediate response of food and electricity support and all of that. But we still have a ways to go to build more resilient communities. County Executive Ball, you represent a jurisdiction, Howard County, that has experienced significant storm damage in the last couple of years. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe what your jurisdiction's done, lessons learned from that?
So I'm really glad you brought that up, the time over years. Oftentimes it's very easy for us to see a particular storm in that one moment and think that's a challenge. However, one of the reasons why having this discussion and the work that we're doing on climate change is critical is because of what we saw in just a microcosm of our world in Ellicott City, where we saw flooding in 2011, 2016, 2018. It is going to hit our various jurisdictions, our state, our nation, and our world. And we need to have better plans. In Ellicott City, we have our Safe and Sound Plan, our Watershed Master Plan, but we need to have better plans and utilize tomorrow's technology to prepare for those next storms, because unfortunately, they are coming.
Any other lessons learned at this table from this last storm or perhaps some storms that we've seen in recent years? Anything your offices are doing or policy solutions you're seeking based on those storms?
So we've been hit pretty hard by rainfall, and our folks are saying neighborhoods that never flooding now. And it's because the stormwater systems that were built, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago weren't built for the kind of storms we're having today. And so the experience of flooding, we just had, there was a downpour that was at 3:30 in the morning probably, displaced 150 people in one apartment building, killed one person. When I went out and looked at the scene, the water was receding at its high mark along the buildings. The bottom level apartments were under as many as 6 feet of water. And it comes in at 3:30 in the morning, people are sleeping, and they don't know they're underwater until the water's up to their beds, and that's just a frightening thought. We know that we have to re-examine our storm sewer system, and this is a major capital project. I mean, all of us have struggled to do the normal things, right? Roads and schools, occasional rec center, library, that stuff. Now we're confronted with, what do we do to get into our streets to change the size of the pipes, or to work outside the streets and make sure we can disperse as much water before it ever hits the pipes. How are we going to do all that? It's going to be a major project, but it's one of those things, if we don't address it, the consequences for the peoples in our communities just can be worse.
County Executive Pittman?
Yeah, I mean, I want to just say that with these heavy rains come a lot of erosion. And I used to sit on the Soil Conservation District Board in Anne Arundel County, and we would do the erosion and sediment control plans for especially new development. And they're created to handle about 1.5 inches of rain. And we have a lot more than that in a 24-hour period often. And we get these, we call it chocolate milk in the Chesapeake Bay and in our rivers when those systems fail, those silt fences fail. So we're not designing them for the modern kinds of storms that we have. Thank you, Senator Elfrith, for your bill that forces the Maryland Department of the Environment to update their standards. But it really is, the great thing about fighting climate change, I think, is that everything that we're asked to do, either to respond to prevent these disasters, are things we should be doing anyway. And they're great for the environment. They're great for the Chesapeake Bay. They're great for our health and our wellness.
Well, I'd like to thank each of your staffs because they all had a hand in that stormwater bill, but we can almost laugh about it except for the extreme consequences, but the data had last been updated when I was in grade school. That's how old the data on rainfall we've been using from a policy perspective and a built environment perspective. So we, are a party that believes in science and believes that the climate is changing, and we need to update our laws and our standards to meet that. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about prevention measures and what we can all be doing at the local level to stem the tide of climate change. So on recycling, I'm going to give this to the County Executive Elrich first. What are your localities doing to ensure recycling materials don't end up in landfills?
So we start by recycling paper, cardboard, plastic, glass, metal, and that's your basic policy. We collect and compost leaf mulch and grass cuttings. It's not enough. And I had a meeting today, and we have a large MRF, recycling facility municipal in the county, and we're looking at redoing it, and to make sure that more of what comes in there actually gets recycled. There's a lot more product that's going into these things that, in our case, is ending up in an incinerator, which I am determined to close because it's a bad thing. But we have too much stuff ending up in that incinerator. A lot of it ends up in the air. We want to make sure we can find other uses for it. And we had a very interesting presentation from a company that believes that their program can lead to an increased amount of recycling. Their ability to use technology in ways that hasn't been used before could really be significant for us. We're looking at whether we're going to expand composting or move to an anaerobic digester. Because for me, it is a virtuous cycle. I could actually produce a gas that I could use to run my hydrogen buses, which we're going to be buying. So there's a lot of things I think we can do. We are doing targeted inspections for enforcement, and we're getting a higher level of compliance after residents are told they're not recycling the right way. We have education campaigns, outreach into diverse communities. So we're doing everything we can to increase community awareness, but also change the way we do things fundamentally.
All very exciting initiatives. County Executive Pittman, I know you're also working on both composting and electric vehicles, forgive me. Can you talk a little bit about one or the other or both?
Yeah, but let me just say on your last thing about the recycling centers, we were at risk of losing a contract because so many plastic bags were going in, and a lot of it we found is about public education. So we do quarterly mailings now from our Department of Public Works, and we got people to finally stop throwing those darn plastic bags in with their recycling that would get caught up in those roller things and make the folks who we have the contracts with go nuts. And we really cut that down a lot. And so that helps, and you get better contracts. But the public education on the recycling is really important. Yeah, I mean, composting, we do have a regional compost center coming in. I was part of the horse industry trying to get regional composting for horse manure so that people wouldn't put it in the wrong place, and that's starting to happen. And then electric vehicles, of course, We would love to have a 100% electric fleet already, but we can't do it quite that quickly. We now have hybrid police cars that we're buying, hoping to get to all electric police cars, and we have a plan that our central services folks are working on to get our whole fleet to electric as well. And that's one of the things that local government can do, is to lead the rest, the private sector, by setting an example and doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And you might be the only county executive in Maryland history focused on properly composting horse manure, but that is important.
It's good stuff.
To the other county exec, anything fun related to recycling or diverting from landfills?
You know, to County Executive Elrich's point, just the amount of food waste that goes into the landfill is staggering. And finding solutions to issues like that. I mean, it seems sort of in the weeds, but those are the kind of policy solutions that really drive, I think, big, impactful changes. Thinking about how we can then capture the energy of as we're collecting trash and sort of being productive. Those are the kind of innovative solutions you find at the local level that we can then replicate on a statewide basis and nationally. And so those are the conversations that we're all having collectively to move forward. So I just, wanted to put that out there as something that's, I think, timely and interesting.
Yeah, and I would concur. In Howard County, we've been working to expand our food scrap program, which is now in more than half of our trash zones. And like my colleagues, we believe in education and empowerment. And so we have these educational campaigns, recycle right and know before you throw. Because now we're at the place where so many people want to do the right thing, but they may not know how. And we want to empower our residents to be partners in recycling.
Absolutely. And just a quick anecdote, one of my COVID projects was actually to build a composting heap in my backyard, and we started composting and cut down on what we're diverting to that we're putting into landfills. So personal choice, but also coupled with strong local leadership is gonna help us in this position. On a similar note of how the counties themselves can be leaders, what, if anything, are your offices doing to conserve energy? We talked a little bit about electric vehicles, hydrogen buses, Mr. County Executive? Oh, that's exciting. Okay. And electric. Okay. What else are we doing to conserve energy as county offices ourselves? Anybody can jump in.
LED lights, right? Street lights and in our buildings.
Well, on the streetlight point, I mean, we started a STAT program that didn't exist that many of my colleagues have had running for some time, and we realized that streetlights were the number one cost of our electric bills. And so not only an environmental imperative, but an economic one for us. And so we're working with our agencies and BG&E to make sure that we're converting both their streetlights and ours to both save taxpayers money, but also do right by the environment. We've also, engaged with outside vendors who've come in, and they will actually help retrofit our buildings to be more energy efficient. But we're actually doing those upgrades in a way that we're going to recapture the savings of the energy costs that we're reducing to put it back into the project. So we're doing these projects at no cost through these energy efficiency projects. So again, it's an innovation where we're doing right by our taxpayers, but we're also doing right by the environment. And that's, I think what we all should be looking towards. So.
Yeah, and in Howard County, we've been trying to do the same. Our goal is to convert 8,000 street lights to LED by 2025, and we've been working on our police fleet to be EV. We have 11 solar power purchase agreement projects in the work to generate 44 million kilowatt hours. And so we've been working to diversify the ways in which we can conserve energy and create these sustainable projects that will last beyond any administration.
And we're building more solar on our buildings. We're experimenting with vertical solar, clear solar glass that can go on the side of the building. We're going to try it on a small rec center to see whether Miami Heat Stadium is using this kind of glass. So we figure we can look into doing this in Montgomery County as well. So we're looking at that, and we're converting our fleet. We're actually working with Ford. We bought the first electric Mustangs, and we're working with Ford to see if we can outfit them in a way they'll actually function as police cars. So we're going to flip our bus fleet to all clean and all of our county vehicles to all clean. and some hydrogen for buses and also for heavy equipment.
Now, the burning question is, are you going to get one of those Mustangs, Mr. County Executive, or are they for the police?
They replaced my flaming Bolt with with one of them. But you know, my personal vehicle is a Kia Niro, which is also an all-electric vehicle, and I've been electric since 2013 when I bought a Leaf.
Okay, well, I think that leads to it's a great segue into what individual citizens can do to help here. So we got a great question. What are 3 suggestions for citizens, ways that they can help local governments in executing our climate change mitigation plans and operations? What can we tell the audience about what they can do in their own lives?
Well, I think plant more trees. You know, in Howard County, since I become county executive, we've been partnering with our neighborhood and our community, and we've together planted more than 50,000 trees in Howard County. So work to plant more trees.
I love it.
I'd say, you know, go as electric as you can go, whether it's your vehicle and frankly, whether it's solar on your house. I mean, the days of people wondering when the payoff is going to be are kind of gone. I mean, I talked to, you know, people who are making this change. The payoffs are a lot quicker than they used to be. They're definitely worth doing, and it's something the residents can do. And I see more solar going up around Montgomery County all the time, and I think that's a really good thing. And we're the best ambassadors, because if you put solar, and I'm getting an installer to come look at my roof this week. If you put solar and it works, and you go tell your neighbor, I did this, you live in the same neighborhood with the same kind of house, you tell them what it did to your electric bills, it's going to encourage other people to do the same.
And we're never going to get to our goal of 50% renewable energy as a state by 2030 unless we encourage that individual behavior. So I love that suggestion. County Executive Pittman.
I want to follow up on the plant your trees. Calvin's probably the number one thing, which of course we're doing in Anne Arundel as well with our Watershed Stewards Academy. But in order to make those trees grow, one has to have really healthy soil. And the more healthy the soil is, the more trees will grow and the more other plants will grow. And if you are a farmer in particular, there's a lot you can do, because good soil actually stores carbon as well, and it absorbs water, which prevents runoff. And there's so much more that we can do in the healthy soils area. The state has a committee that started to work on it, but everybody can do it in their yard. And if you really want to go all the way with it, Google soil your undies. And that started in England. They're doing it in Oregon. You take cotton underwear with the nylon strap around it. You put it about a foot underground and you leave it there for 6 weeks and you pull it out. And if all that's left is the nylon, you have healthy soil. So soil your undies.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks.
Heard it here first. Well, we'll round it out so folks have 3 suggestions. So we've got trees, we've got going electric, and I'll just add, use public transportation when you can. And the only thing I'll add on all those 3 things is that this is a table of state and local leaders who believe in these things and are making them happen, because we're doing things like having programs where trees are free for people. We're doing things like having energy conservation tax credits and other incentives to make the math work on going electric at the house and putting solar panels on roofs. And we're making investments and supporting you, Senator, at the state level for transportation investments so that people can get around in a safe, efficient manner on public transportation. So I would say that those are all, I think, good advices and things that we're trying to all push together.
Okay. And maybe, I'm sorry, can you say that again? Plant your...
Soil your undies.
Soil your undies. Okay. So that's a perfect segue into what changes to public transportation should be made to mitigate the effects of climate change. Now, we just did a major bill at the state level. We're going to have to do a little more work on that to make it into law. But other thoughts, what can we do at the local level to invest in greater public transportation opportunities?
So we've mapped out over 100 miles of BRT routes in the county. We need state assistance because it's a challenge for us to solely fund these things, but we're starting on design on several of them. We're going to upgrade Route 29. You all in Howard County are invited to build a connection from Columbia or Ellicott City down to our line, which would help a lot of your folks and my folks get out of traffic. And then redesigning the system so that we're doing 2 pilots where we're putting small circulator buses within a mile or 2 of a metro, and they go through the surrounding neighborhoods and feed people into the metro stops. So a combination of long-haul BRT and local, micro transit or small level transit, I think, is a an important step.
And I think County Executive Elrich, in his conversation about bus rapid transit, just speaks to the importance of us working together. When Montgomery and Howard County can work together, that connects folks. And Howard, we have about a third of our residents commuting outside of the county toward the DC area, and about a third commuting outside of the county toward the Baltimore area. And so the more that we can work regionally, the better it is. And then just on a very neighborhood level, complete streets, making sure that people can have safe, accessible ways to walk and bike to get to the areas where they need to do business and visit. Just like County Executive Olszewski said, get out of your car when you can.
And can I pull on that thread a little bit, County Executive Ball, because we saw this a lot in this last tornado that we had, and traffic backups, and we just don't have sidewalks in every community. And so when we have kids stranded at a school because we have a bus driver shortage, there's no way for them to safely get home. So I love your point about completing these neighborhoods and making them walkable, bikeable, all of those wonderful things.
So one of the most important things I think that local government does is planning for development. And so we just completed our Plan 2040, our general development plan, and we really shifted the focus from sprawl development. We're pretty much built out the areas we want to build anyway, to transit-oriented development, which can get people to ride public transit if their homes and their businesses and the places they go to hang out in the evening are in places that are accessible by public transit. So for instance, the Odenton MARC station is the busiest one that we have. People do commute into DC and up to Baltimore, and so we finally figured out a way to pay for the structured parking so that people can actually get to that train station, and then there will be development around there, and that's something I think that local government does. It's often controversial, but it's kind of where the rubber hits the road on some of this.
I was going to say pun intended, but Executive Olszewski.
I'll just add on the partnership thing. It's not only the collaboration, and I think County Executive Ball may have an exciting interjurisdictional announcement at some point on that front. He's leading on it, so I'll let him save that for later. But we're leading with action, and it's also with our state partners like you, Senator. But also, I want to give a shout out to our federal delegation here. All but one member of our federal delegation recognize that investments in transportation and investments in green infrastructure matters, and they are fighting every day to make sure we have those resources from our federal government to come down to make sure that we're enabled to do that. So.
Great. So we've talked about some of our policy solutions when we've seen bigger storms, more major heat waves, rising waters, and I thought Council President Collins did an incredible job of setting the stage that this is not an Annapolis City Dock problem. This is a Dorchester County, Ellicott City, Montgomery County, Baltimore City County problem. It affects every corner of the state of Maryland. So I want to dig down a little bit more into some of our direct policy solutions in adapting to climate change. And County Executive Pittman, I'm going to call on you because we have some really exciting things happening in Anne Arundel County. If you could touch on those first, I would appreciate it.
Thanks, too. Another one of the bills that you got, that you led on in the General Assembly, which was to create the Resilience Authority. And I always have to stop myself because I like to say that we're creating the first Resilience Authority in Anne Arundel County, and then I remember that Reuben from Charles County beat us to the punch. But we're working on it as well. And you wouldn't think this is a partisan issue to figure out a way to pay for the infrastructure, the public infrastructure things that we need to adapt, the roads that need to be raised, the bridges that need to be prepared for higher sea levels, but it unfortunately seems to be. So when we had our local bill to create our Resilience Authority, it got 4 of 7 votes. The 4 Democrats voted yes. And when we put money in our budget to fund the staff to staff our Resilience Authority, it was the same deal. But we have to create these things because we have to get them off of our books. We can't afford it in our capital budgets. We have debt limits, and some of these projects should be funded in innovative ways. They should be paid for potentially by that community or by the businesses that are affected by it. So we can get there. It's a real challenge. I think you'll probably see resilience authorities all over the state very soon, and that's just one thing that we're doing here.
Great. Anything else exciting on the horizon?
Well, for us, we're working on our climate action plan. And of course, as I referenced previously, our safe and sound flood mitigation plan for Ellicott City. And just one thing that I would like to suggest as we continue to move forward, as much partnership with the community as possible. Oftentimes, we come up with policies that are data informed and people driven, but we don't include the people. And so including our residents and our businesses in the development of these plans also allows there to be more stakeholder involvement, more skin in the game, and then as they are implemented, we're doing it as partners.
I think ground up community building right here is what's the most important thing.
We've introduced a green building code, the International Green Building Code, and we're updating to the 2018 version. Hopefully the council will support that. It's far more aggressive than the earlier one we were working on, and it would require newer buildings really to come to the zero energy standard. And we put in what's called the BEPS program, which is also the council has to approve, but it's building energy performance standards. We have performance standards. They're okay, but they're not going to get us where we need to go. So this updates the performance standards and requires people to bring their buildings up to standard. And we're going to have to figure out how we help fund some of this stuff, particularly for equity issues. You know, if I require this on on low income housing, that where the rent streams are limited, and add on a lot of capital expense to a project, we're likely to displace people. We have an obligation to both deal with climate change, but do it in a way that doesn't increase the inequities in society. So we're looking at how we can help fund some of these changes.
I might have a bill idea for you after this. County Executive Mashevsky.
Just building on the idea of equity, I mean, we can embed that in our policy making, and we can have equity and sustainability actually work collaboratively, and they should, right? So again, using data, things like looking at tree canopy. And so one of the things we're going to be rolling out in Baltimore County is a tree equity program, right? So it's not just planting trees, and it's great that our farms are great places to plant trees for the reasons that County Executive Pittman mentioned, but oftentimes what happened was to meet our prior MS4 requirements or other issues, it was just how can we get trees in the ground, as opposed to taking a step back and say, where are we planting the trees? What does that canopy coverage look like? Because we know the other benefits of home values and asthma and other sort of public health impacts of having tree canopy. So I think just thinking about it with applying both the sustainability and an equity lens to all of our decision making actually helps us sort of drive to get, and that they can and should be driven together.
And we try to achieve that at the state level when we're going to be needing to work with the locals on our tree goals over the next few years, and ensuring that at least 10% of the funding is going to go to these overburdened communities. I'd like to get a trend started, if you can help me, under-treed communities, because I think that's where we do need to focus our energy here for every reason the county executive mentioned: air quality, heat island effect, stormwater, flooding, all of those benefits that trees can provide if we focus them in the communities that need them the most. So with that, one more question we had in advance for everybody. Can you look ahead? What legislation, either at your local county council level or that you're going to be lobbying the General Assembly or Congress, frankly, in the near future, are you proposing to address climate change? Anything on the agenda?
I know what I'd like. Sources of capital. But the other thing is, if the state would bring forward its clean grid goals from 2045 to 2035, it would radically change our ability to do things, because we're going to spend a lot of money trying to get things green, but at some point the grid's actually going to be green. If that grid effort moved forward, we would be able to take the resources that we would spend on trying to solarize every inch of the universe and be able to use it to address some of these other problems, because you and all of us live in a limited dollar universe. And so we make choices where we spend our money. I'd like to have the state lead where it could create a green grid so we could spend our money someplace else. I'm committed to spending the money. I just have what little money we have.
I'll be down working with you, Senator, on issues like the Climate Solutions Now Act that I know that I think we're close to it last session. I think it'll be a top priority for you and other Maryland Democrats in the General Assembly this year. Hopefully we can get some Republicans to come along for the ride. But I think it's really important that we have these bold, comprehensive solutions that help set the stage for progress on this environmental issue. And, you know, it's not at the expense of. I mean, I was at Trade Point Atlantic a few weeks ago where we celebrated the announcement of over 500 permanent jobs where steel is returning to power an offshore wind industry. We're putting people to work as we're protecting and preserving our environment. So having these standards and forcing us down that road towards having renewable energy and requiring us to act with that urgency actually ends up being a net good in many ways too. So seeing that transformation in a very real and tangible way in the offshore wind industry gets me excited about coming down and supporting your efforts on that legislation this upcoming session.
Yeah, and I think in Washington now, at least the Democrats and our president have a plan. I mean, I don't think we're short on ideas. I think we're short on commitment. We got to put the right people in office so that we can pass the bills for infrastructure. Call it the Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it. But it's jobs, it's economic development, and it's our environmental future.
And I think that, as you're seeing in this conversation, it's working together at the federal level, the state level, and the local level in moving this industry forward and working with our private sector partners and how to empower and educate them in being even stronger partners in protecting our environment.
So we got a couple questions from the audience, and I like this one in particular. We're months away from the primary for the next governor. But what are you looking for? We talked about partnership. What are you looking for as county executives from the gubernatorial candidates in their climate change platforms? What is most helpful to the locals in this fight?
Well, I think, like you said, a strong partner, someone who has a real vision, and not only that vision, but a way to implement our climate goals. Someone who, like each of us, may be leaders in our own rights in our various jurisdiction, but who is going to ensure that Maryland is a leader. Because when we set those aspirational goals, not only do we make ourselves stretch, but we inspire the rest of the nation to come on board. And I think Maryland should be a leader when it comes to our environment.
And I think we need somebody who can not only tell us what their plan is, but can also convince a lot of people to buy into that plan. So we need somebody who can really communicate the message and bring people along.
We've got some great candidates, so I'm excited to watching them articulate their vision on climate and on environmental issues. For me, one thing specifically that I think touches both my region but also this issue is a commitment to robust public transportation in the Baltimore area. And so that's one of the things that sort of touches on two things for me that I know Mayor Scott shares a passion for with me, and I'm looking forward to hearing our gubernatorial leaders in this race talking about how this is both it's a racial justice issue, it's an economic development issue, and it is a climate imperative. So that's something I'll be looking for from our candidates.
And I want to hear the commitment to the funding as well as the plan. Because everybody's got plans. Everybody's rhetoric. We struggle sometimes to tell the difference between people based on what they say. But tell me how you're going to do it, because I want to hook up with the person who actually has the plan to get us there.
As a proud member of the Budget and Taxation Committee, I couldn't agree with you more. We got another question that I'd like to focus on. We've talked a little bit about electric vehicles, and I know each of you have some exciting plans to expand charging stations in your counties. Can you talk a little bit about those plans, how you're funding them, what the future looks like?
We're looking at putting them on telephone poles. Not all telephone poles, but we've seen other jurisdictions do this. We know you can drop wires down and spread the charging stations out. The more charging stations you have, the less range anxiety. As an electric vehicle owner who's been in turtle mode on my car because I had a mile left in my range, I know how desperate that can be. So I think that's one important thing we're going to do. We're looking at microgrids, but I think charging infrastructure is really critical to getting people into electric vehicles. You crack that nut so you feel like you're going to a gas station. I think the game really changes.
I think partnering with different businesses, partnering with builders, and also us as we're moving forward in a government, thinking about that charging stations. In Howard County, we have about 1,600 vehicles, and we have about 120 that are now EVs, and we've got about 60 more on the way. So continuing to make that investment, to lead the way, to set the example for why we need it, and then encouraging others to make those investments for, both government and private folks.
Yeah, making them available for our employees. I mean, that's what we're doing. We are working with BG&E on it in our parking lots. Also, our libraries and all of our main parking areas is where we're starting. But again, setting the example.
I will call it an audible moderator's privilege because I know this is a space, Forest Conservation Act, that the locals have really led the way. It's something the state's not been able to tackle since it's first passed in 1992. I won't tell you how old I was then, but it's a long time coming, and I know many of you at this table have worked on it, and I'm hoping that we have momentum from the locals to get the state, coerce us into action. But can you talk a little bit about that, County Executive Ball? I know you're working on it.
So we updated our Forest Conservation Act for the first time since the 1990s in Howard County, and we've been working on our Forest Conservation Manual. It is tough work, and it is complicated, and as you noted, so much has changed since the 90s, and having these outdated acts and manuals, it doesn't respect the need, the sense of urgency, and how to do things in today's ways to accomplish tomorrow's goals.
I like bills that are stronger. And, one of the things we struggle with is allowing developers to take down trees and then get credit for trees that already exist. That's ridiculous. They're not going to be cut down. There's no evidence that the farmers are going to cut them down. So tree banking ought to be real tree banking, not faux tree banking.
It's interesting. We talked about party a little, and here we are at the Democratic Party. And when we introduced our forest conservation bill early on, somebody did a poll, and it actually showed about 80% support, over 80% support for a very strong forest conservation bill from both parties. It was even slightly a niche, probably polling error, higher among Republicans. And it wasn't that way on the county council when it came time to vote. The Republicans watered the bill down, and we didn't get quite what we wanted, but it was a strong bill, and that really mattered. We had the strongest bill in the state for about, 2-3 weeks until Howard County came along. And then Frederick, the dominoes are falling. But it's how we drive development into redevelopment areas is we preserve, and we don't do the sprawl, we preserve our forested areas.
I'll just add to your point, Senator. I think what we find, and this is a different subject, but we found that the Home Act, so ending discrimination by source of income, was one of those issues where county by county, folks stood up and made the right decisions and made the right changes in our local jurisdictions. And you'd see it in Howard, in Montgomery, Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Frederick, and then eventually it was like, okay, this makes sense for the state. So I think on so many issues, it is why a lot of times we'll see leadership on these local issues that then drive the policy at the state level.
Sometimes we need that kick in the butt, I got to tell you. So another question that came in from the audience, can we talk a little bit about community choice energy and why it's important?
So we're going to be the poster child.
Okay. You heard it here
for
first.
community, and we're the voluntary poster child for this. I'm a big believer in this. It gives us the opportunity to take the entire buying power of Montgomery County and go to people who've got clean energy and say, how much are you willing to give me to get access to this market? And, for those who believe in markets, that's what buying power is supposed to be able to get for you. We should be able to go out and find people who are willing to compete from this. We're talking about power purchase agreements. We've had conversations with the people competing to do windmills. I think we've got a lot to offer, and frankly, I think that if we succeed and everybody else gets the opportunity to do this, we may be able to change our grid a little bit faster, because if people have to compete to get our business, and I know it upset the energy industry, but we just set the same rule for us that they had, is you have to opt out of the community choice. So when the county picks the power supplier, people are perfectly free to change it, but they have to opt out. And PEPCO objected to our opting out, but they were okay with people having to opt out of their system. So we figured it works for them, it'll work for us, and I think we can deliver value to our residents.
Last question I have of the night. We've talked about transportation all evening, but it's now the top source of greenhouse gas emissions nationally. And we've talked about some regional solutions to bus transportation and metro, but and I hear a commitment from each of the, really the question is about, is there more support for local bus services to reduce dependence on cars? And I've heard that throughout, but I think one of the takeaways I have this evening is how closely y'all work together on some of these regional challenges. So anything exciting on bus transportation, rapid transit that we can focus on and highlight tonight?
Well, we all are through the Baltimore Metropolitan Council trying to figure out a better way to coordinate regional transit and how to structure that. There are a lot of regions around the country that have done that. So there's a study that's just been done, and we're having the conversation about what's the best system to do that. But I know that each of us individually in our counties are doing what we can as well. And it's funny, we're trying to get people onto buses, and we're talking about the electrification. And I'm convinced that electric buses are so much cooler and cleaner. You know, when you think of getting on the bus, it's the big stinky diesel thing. And so we're really excited about using some of this federal infrastructure money to get electric buses. We've applied for some, creating a nice transit center in the middle in Parole near Annapolis, and using that to get more people onto them.
I think we have to be more willing to look at putting buses in separate guideways, because at the end of the day, if you're in heavily congested traffic, I could have the time between buses, and they're still going to be stacked up in traffic and not going to serve people. So we need to take the steps necessary to create, I'm a big fan of reversible lanes, because most of us have totally directional traffic. It's one way in the morning, different way in the afternoon. I can use reversible lanes and serve the main flow. It cuts down our capital costs. It's more easy to implement, the less right-of-way you've got to grab. But I think it's important to do that, because if you look at traffic studies, choice riders are people who could actually decide to drive, as the many of our folks who have no choice but to ride a bus. For people you're trying to get out of their cars, they need to feel that the trip is at least as fast, if not faster. And if I can combine at least as fast with, Wi-Fi service, so a person can either entertain themselves as they're going in or work. I'm not going to say which is better, but that if we can combine those things, we can make the bus trip the preferred trip, and we need to do that.
Well, as I talked about previously with our power purchase agreement, having those 11 solar projects is the equivalent of those 44 million kilowatt hours, but that also takes about 6,800 cars off the road. And so the more that we can do that, the more impact we can make. And to a previous point about, that County Executive Pittman made, where he had the strongest Forest Conservation Act until we had the strongest Forest Conservation Act. Iron sharpens iron. Mm-hmm. And so when we all have healthy competition about how we can do a better job of protecting our environment, or, frankly, figuratively and literally saving the world, that's how we continue to make each other better and push each other. I remember reading about power purchase agreement in Baltimore County, and what a great job County Executive Olszewski was doing, and saying, let's do it just a little bit better. And so I'm hoping I'll be able to read in a few months someone else saying, hey, you know what, Howard County did a great job, let's just do a little bit better.
And on the transportation front especially, I'm grateful to have examples to follow, because as recently as a year ago, transportation wasn't even mentioned in one of our agencies. I mean, it was just this year that Baltimore County renamed the Department of Public Works to be the Department of Public Works and Transportation. Before we came into office, there wasn't even a transportation bureau. We didn't have a bike and ped planner. And so you think about the urgency of these issues, and in some cases we're way behind the ball. And so we're trying to not just be where we need to be. We have to make up for all the lost time and some of those poor planning decisions that have made it more difficult to have walkable neighborhoods and bikeable neighborhoods, that have made it more difficult to have mass transit be accessible and reliable. So we've sort of started behind the curve, but I'm grateful to have such great state partners and federal partners who recognize that we need the support to be successful, and to have colleagues with whom I can compare notes and also look up to and say, you guys are doing great work. We want to replicate that in Baltimore County.
Healthy competition is a wonderful policy driver, and the county executive of Anne Arundel knows that we used to have a competition when we ran together in 2018, who would pass the Forest Conservation Act first, county or state, and I've had to buy him many beers since then because they beat us. But I want to give the opportunity for just any closing remarks from the panel. I want to thank you all so much for your time and your leadership on this, but anything you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I would just say that it's one of these issues that feels like it's so overwhelming because it's such a big challenge that sometimes we don't know where to start, so we don't do anything. And that's just not what we do. That's not what we do as Democrats. I mean, we look at the big challenges and we confront them. And you look in the eyes of our children, and you listen to them, and they tell us, "Do this, old people. Get on it. Come on, you messed it up. Clean it up. Fix it up." And so I'm just gratified that so many people are now on the train, and we're addressing these issues.
I think the ability of us to learn from each other is really important. I mean, bandwidth is a real thing. In the world, each of us deals with a set of problems, and you try to manage the set of problems as best you can. When you see what somebody else has done something, and you're like, maybe we could do that. And everybody's experiment and everybody's step forward becomes a step that other people say, can I follow that? And I think that's the benefit, frankly, of having these Democrats in these critical areas who can say this is the path forward. We did this on COVID, frankly. We charted our own course. We set different standards, and we achieved things that other people weren't able to achieve. And I think you can take that example and take it over to the climate. And I think we can each chart courses that are different that'll be examples for all of us to follow.
Oftentimes the most exciting and fun superhero movies are the ones where numerous heroes come from their various cities and they come together and form a team to fight against this existential threat. And I think bringing our various knowledge, skills, and abilities together to fight against climate change, we're going to beat it. And I think if I would leave our audience with anything, is together we're going to get it done.
Just to echo County Executive Ball, I think it's important to be optimistic. And it's important to say not only can we do this thing, but we can be better for it as a result. That we can not only leave a world that is inhabitable for my soon-to-be 6-year-old daughter, but we can do it in a way where she and those with whom she's coming up have quality jobs in green manufacturing, where we can say we actually addressed racial disparities in this space, and that we're honoring the legacy of people like George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement through our actions in this space and in all spaces. But I think I hope people leave tonight knowing that there is that work is being done, and that we're going to keep doing it until we get where we need to be.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you all so much for your work and your dedication to this incredibly important issue, for your partnership between each other and with the state. I want to thank you, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful chair, Yvette Lewis.
Thank you to Howard County Executive Calvin Ball, Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich, Baltimore County Executive John Olszewski, and Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, Senator Sarah Elfreth, and Commissioner President Reuben Collins for joining us tonight for such an informative and thoughtful discussion. We are thankful to have so many fantastic Democrats representing us here in Maryland. Every single day we can be proud of the work that they do. Thank you to Louis Laria and New Visual Studios for handling the digital and logistical side of getting these events up on YouTube and social media. We really couldn't do it without your technical expertise, and we are very grateful. I hope everyone watching will join us next month for our 5th Climate Change panel. Thank you again tonight. Thank you to Angie Cannon, Ed Hatcher, and all for joining us. Have a good evening.